one of many truths. Thank you for your service. I hear this phrase from numerous people. The first time I heard it, I felt ashamed, defeated, dishonest. I couldn't make sense of the words. What service were they thanking me for? I didn't understand because I felt like my military experience was fake and dishonorable. My involvement with the military is not the only experience that may sound alarming. Every veteran has a story and, better yet, a voice.
Imagine you're 15 and you already know what you want to do with the rest of your life. You've always been fascinated by war, by weapons, and destruction. Of course you are naive, but you don't know this, and you may never really figure this out. You watch in a classroom as planes fly into the World Trade Center. As you watch, people jump, plummeting to certain death rather than burning alive. Something inside you catches fire. You were bullied once by your father. You learn never to let that happen again. Now you find yourself drawn to a coming battle. You realize at this moment you will be part of this battle, but you don't realize the cost that will be associated.
2004, Fallujah, Iraq. Panic throughout the camp. Military personnel shuffle to and fro in a frenzy. Our pace quickening, the intensity increasing as our anxiety builds from the rumors circulating via the unofficial intelligence source dubbed the Lance Corporal Underground. The frightful, accurate rumor mill of the lower-ranking Marines. My team, a Quick Reaction Force, or QRF, forms up outside the 8th station where day after day we've been sleeping and bullshitting. We gather in the scorching heat under the sandblasted camouflage netting intended to disrupt any enemy radar. The wind cakes the station's canvas walls with a new layer of brown moon dust, then blows onward to the next building until all you see is tiny dust particles placed on every millimeter of everything in sight.
I trusted my drill sergeant, but this was the beginning of what I call the trail of mistakes, because one day my whole world turned. As I sat and smoked with him one evening, enjoying the amazing taste of Marble Lights and soaking in an ounce of freedom for 1 minute, he grabbed me and sat me on his lap. He began touching me. At that moment, several emotions, good and bad, ran through my head. I liked the attention of someone being attracted to me, but I felt like his behavior was crossing a boundary I hadn't established. I blamed myself for walking down to the basement that night. I'd let him lure me in with nicotine, and soon after, it became alcohol. I was now 20 years old.
I thought killing somebody would be hard. It wasn't. A simple squeeze of the trigger and a human being becomes a lifeless corpse. Living with it is the hard part. It makes you different from other people. You have no one to relate to about it. Those that have don't talk about it, and those that haven't wouldn't know what to say. It's a burden that we carry around secretly. Even though I always returned fire and never shot first, who was right and wrong doesn't feel as important after the fact, just who lived. That day my innocence was taken.
Death, accepting death. In 5 years my grandfather would be on the precipice of death, but of course I don't know this here in Iraq, as I myself wander in death's shade. How could I know that in 5 years I would be a platoon sergeant for 44 Marines? That on a long weekend I'd come home and my mother would urge me to visit my grandfather.
In the military, everyone has a call sign. Today, I am so honored to have my call sign be SMV, for a single mother veteran. I like this call sign because I am a single woman, I am a mother, and I am a veteran. It feels good, and now I can finally start to renew the value of my life because I am worth it.
This isn't a story I wrote so you would feel sorry for me. You can keep your pity. I wrote this story for anybody else that stumbles in this journey of life. Obviously, I didn't do it. I set aside my hubris and weakness and found help. I will leave you with the motto of the infantry. Follow me.
So here in Iraq, pinned down in the shadow of my own possible death as illumination rounds dance their tango through the beautiful, starlit Iraqi sky, the reality of consequences sets in. This private first class had volunteered for everything so he could live up to his senior stories, so he could crush any perceived shortcomings of us new guys. But now, after a couple of months, I just want to go home. I had enough of getting shot at, of losing friends. The reality has transcended the romance of combat, innately inherent in every boy. My youth's perceptions are now shattered. The beauty of young omnipotence, of blissful ignorance, of naiveties in all their glory are no more. I have a family to get home to, a grandfather I want to see again. For the first time in my life, I really might die.
So, the reason I wrote this story was to gain freedom of my life. I felt like I was still living in my past and felt like I should be punished for anything that went on. And after reading this or writing this story and then reading it in front of everybody, I felt healed.
We were looking for something to do for Veterans Day to kind of raise awareness about veterans themselves, and your class was doing had done a lot of vet stories that veterans had written, and I thought it might be a good idea to have them read it out loud. And in doing that, I kind of felt obligated to write a story myself and read it just to lead from the front.
The story I wrote, it's a two-part story. Half of it was written my first semester here in Las Positas, 2014 in the fall, and it was horrible writing it. I had I had pounding headaches. I had to drink to get through it. I had to take several breaks, several days, but I finished it, and the process of it was, as I wrote, I put it on paper. I relived it as the ink dried, and more and more came to me that I've suppressed because this is me. This is me 2014 in the fall. I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps 2 months prior, and I'm writing about stuff that I've suppressed for over 11 years. I mean, it was hard. It was tough. So the second part of the paper, which with Professor Ott, we put together and made it together. That one was harder even to write. We were reading a book, Yellowbirds, and the second part of the paper that I wrote was in response to us reading that book. And the book itself was its own journey. I had to put it down, and the first chapter took me 4 tries to complete, to read. And then once I was able to start writing, it was even tougher. It was difficult. It was hard. I started getting nightmares, started getting flashbacks, started getting more anxiety attacks. It was horrible. But at the end of it, it was something that I feel I needed to do because a portion of that burden that I have carried for years is now permanently etched on parchment and away from my shoulders. And that, as difficult as it was a big relief.
So, the process of writing this story, I was actually at Las Positas, and it took me 2 days. I don't even really remember writing this story now, but I do remember that it didn't take me that long because it was like a reenactment movie in my head, and I just kind of was writing my story as the movie was playing.
The process of writing the story was pretty difficult. There's a lot of things that I never shared with anybody, but putting it on paper was a little bit easier because the paper doesn't really judge you, or you don't have to worry about it, how it reacts to anything you tell the paper. So it made things coming out easier. And then the more I wrote the story, the more things I started to tell, and it was it was a good experience.
The recommendations I have for veterans about writing their own story is it's a part of the healing process. Getting it out verbally, mentally, emotionally, and overcoming.
I would definitely recommend writing about your experiences just for the fact that it's a way to get it out. You know, a lot of people have trouble expressing what it was like, you know, and or what happened to them, but it's easier to put it on paper. That it's just talking to people is hard sometimes, and admitting things is hard sometimes, but putting it into paper, it's a lot easier. And then all you have to do is then share that paper, and you don't have to worry about stumbling over your words. You don't have to worry about getting the message because you can edit it down and get the exact message you want to tell people on paper.
Advice for veterans is as difficult as it's going to be. You know, there's going to be varying degrees of difficulty. You know, some veterans are going to be easier than others. Regardless of how difficult it is, put it on paper. As soon as the ink dries, edit it however you want, and that's your story. You know, free of prejudgment, free of people telling you, oh, I know what you're going through. People telling you that you should do this. Free of everybody's expertise. That seems to be the consensus with society out there. Everybody seems to be an expert on what you've been through. You know, the paper doesn't talk back.
That's good. All right. You don't need to make a face.
I know.
I'll have to cut it right there, right?
I started getting hot. I felt like my face was getting red. Woo.
Okay. Are you going to stop it or are you going to keep going? Yeah, you can stop it for a second because
It's fun to keep. Okay.
don't so many.
Right.